Right, well, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and I'm listening to all of this and thinking, okay, so what do we add? I think that one of the interesting things that we've been hearing is very much about an issue of perspectives, because I think that when we get caught up in the debate about whether it's migration in its widest sense, obviously including the current refugee crisis, whether it's labour migration or whatever it is, there's always this focus that somehow the European Union is the only place in the world where this happens, and everybody's country is sort of almost under siege. Certainly if you read maybe coming from the UK, I have a very particular perspective on this, but, if you look at the front pages of a lot of our papers, if it's not Romanians and Bulgarians, then, it's refugees coming from Syria. So I think the facts and the figures are really helpful in terms of actually really getting our heads around the perspective and the proportionality of what is happening here. Although I think that when we're talking about public fears, one of the things that many of us have realised is that facts and figures don't necessarily cut it. It's almost that if you try to introduce facts and figures, you're trying to deny the truth of people's own experience. And I think one of the challenges that's going to come, certainly in the countries at the moment which are accepting the largest number of refugees, is obviously how that plays at the local level. Because it's also one of the things that we hear about issues of free movement, that whereas you can show a net benefit to the economy as a whole, a lot of places at the local level feel, well, okay, that's money going into the national exchequer or whatever, but we are the ones who are having to provide schools, healthcare, or whatever it is. So I think that one of the things the lessons that we should be learning is that this is not just a question about how national governments work with this, but what can we do to actually make sure that the local level is also being supported. You've got the share network, for example, in the European Union, of a number of cities that have been actively engaged in resettlement policies, sort of really taking people from various long-term refugee situations in different parts of the world. There's a lot of expertise at that level, which we really should be drawing on and developing, and looking at how the funding that we have can also work with that, so that people feel supported. And one of the areas of particular support I think we need to be looking at the moment as well is how we actually support not only the formal authorities, but the voluntary organisations and the NGOs that have been absolutely instrumental in making sure that welcome has worked in as many places as it has, and that the situation on the ground has not been worse for individuals, at least in their experience of trying to get into the European Union. That I want to concentrate a bit more on sort of, as it were, within our borders rather than outside, because I think that, again, one of the tendencies that we have, certainly in the European Union, is to look very much at all of this as if it's about who has the right to come or not, rather than actually what happens to people when they're here from the employment perspective. And I'm a member of the Employment Committee as well as the Civil Liberties Committee. And therefore, one of the things that we'll be doing in the Employment Committee is an own initiative report looking at the impact and how we cope with refugees on the labour market and at the local level. We did a report a couple of years back looking at labour migration and the impact, what could be done and what should be done there in terms of not only rights on the labour market, but also integration on the labour market. And I think that we're at risk of not picking up on the lessons that we should have been learning all the way through this. That, as you were saying, in terms of the preparation, one of the things that came out of a programme that was run as part of the Social Fund years back, Equal, on their asylum seeker strand, one of the key lessons that came out of that was that integration began on day one for asylum seekers and the day before that for the communities to which they were coming. So that it was very much about preparation on the ground, people understanding what the situation was, people being very told very clearly what the rights of people coming were, what the limitations are. So that for those countries that, for example, choose not to offer any opportunities on the labour market to asylum seekers, to make it clear that people are on benefits because we won't let them work. I mean, some would be on benefits anyway because the situation they've come from would mean they're nowhere near ready to work. But that, you know, a lot of this is about national government choice. And I think when we're looking at integration of those who do have status on the labour market, we also need to be aware that, again, some of the rules put in place about periods of residence, how long your status lasts for, all of this sort of thing can also make it very difficult for people to find work or long-term work. Is an employer going to take you on when your residence permit is 2 years because you have subsidiary protection and then have to go through all the review again? You know, what are the barriers that we are actually putting in place for people to really be able to access the labour market and to be welcome on it? That certainly when we did the revision of the Qualifications Directive, labour market access was seen by Parliament in general and by a number of member states as absolutely crucial. You know, people being able to access labour market on the same terms as third country nationals, and there's a debate there about, you know, that, but we might rerun that another time. But, you know, that if you're going to say to people, we want you on the labour market, you cannot then say that integration measures belong purely to the member state and that the European Union has no say in what happens or effectively how money is spent. That the barriers that you put in place, as I say, on residence permits, on access to training, on all of these other things are also going to be really important. And it has to be on equal terms, because if it's seen as preferential terms, again, we're setting up a whole set of problems, I think, for ourselves. So there are a lot of lessons learned, and I think it's very interesting looking at Germany at the moment. We had somebody speaking from the German Employment Services very recently here at a seminar that the ILO did, International Labour Organization, looking at what Germany was trying to do. But of course, one of the things with it is how do you find the trained staff that you need in order to be able to deliver this as well. So for once, I think we may be seeing a large recruitment from the public sector in certain member states to actually try and deliver. That, as you were saying as well, this is not a short-term issue. That when you're looking at the ideas that are around about how we deal with some of the countries of origin in terms of stability, people feeling they've got a life chance there, I don't see a great deal of optimism. So I think that we are in the business of making sure that people who come have access to training, have access to the language skills, all of this as well, so that as and when and should people choose to return, they go back with something more than they came with, which I think is part of the issue about development. That if people choose to move on, they have something to take with them. And therefore, we also need to be looking at how we do evaluation of skills, as you were saying, for people who arrive as they arrive. This should be an early part of that integration process. And recognition of qualifications. Some will have their documents with them, a lot will not. You know, you don't necessarily go looking for your degree certificate, you know, when you're fleeing for your life. So I think we need to be investing more in how we are actually going to do that process effectively. I think there's a lot of other things that if I wanted to talk about this in general, I could. People who know me know that I do. But one of the issues, too, that I just wanted to pick up in terms of the general question about migration because it's there. We're supposed to now have a holistic approach. We keep hearing this. But we're supposed as well, part of that is looking at the European Union as being an attractive place for people to come and work. I think at the moment, in a lot of our member states, we are not making this an attractive place to come and work. And that is not to do only with working conditions and countries that want to try and restrict access to benefits, whether it's for EU nationals or not. But if you look at the rise of Islamophobia, if you look at the failure in many member states to actually really implement fully the anti-discrimination directives that exist, if you look at the rising xenophobia that there is about even EU nationals coming to work in our own member states, this is not simply about rules on access to the territory. It's also about what the climate is of welcome for people when they come. And if member states are really serious about wanting to be attractive to skilled workers, and they should be attractive as well to unskilled or lower skilled, if you look at the labour market needs, if we really want to be doing that, then we also have to be doing something about the way in which we talk about people, treat people, and actually fail to use the skills of people who are here properly. Because if you look, one of the issues that came out of the OECD report, for example, was on healthcare and the movement of healthcare professionals. You look at the number of healthcare professionals who come, for example, from the Philippines and who end up doing pretty basic care work rather than actually being used with their full qualifications as nurses. So we talk a lot about brain drain and the way in which the EU and other countries suck up health professionals. If we're going to do that, the least we can do is actually make sure that their qualifications are recognised and they work to the level of their skills. That brain waste is also a part of immigration policy that we need to be looking at. I'll leave it there just in terms of response.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lambert, for this developing this labour market related.